Oh, thank you. Expense out of time now.
Let's give you the,
Thank
okay.
you. Hello everyone. So I'll put that there. Hello, thank you for being here. I am the representational unit of quite a large project team actually. So in this project we looked at, it says misogyny and online-based violence, which sounds quite general, but we really focused on an incel forum. So everything I'm about to say we'll be thinking about incels, and I'll tell you about incels in a minute. But to start off, we had a really big team working on various different projects. So I know most people have like one big project that they kind of worked on, but I will very quickly hopefully cover two. And you'll see that I'm a philosopher, so I do the more theoretical stuff. And I will be talking about some empirical data. But if something sounds really off, that's probably my fault, not the people who worked on the project. But yeah, and all of these wonderful people, essentially we used the money to hire the research assistants, so they've been like incredibly helpful. So to give you some background, this is actually our second Seed Corn fund on the Incel project, so thank you, much appreciated with that. And the first round really gave us an opportunity to get to know the community a little bit, to really understand maybe beyond the surface levels of like incels bad, what's happening on the forum. And in this project, we were able to take all of the data that we scraped and analyzed and cleaned and do like further analysis. So we've got some really exciting outputs actually that are coming out. But the main aims of this project, even though we're looking at misogyny, we're not really focusing on maybe the specific, well, we are focusing on the specific language that they use like towards women and stuff like that, but also what can we tell about someone's identity, someone who uses misogyny on these forums, and try and build a picture in that way. Because the overall goal at some point in the future, fingers crossed, is to propose some like interventions, and we think to be able to do that, you have to understand what's going on there in the first place. So some of these research questions will kind of cover, what is incels' conception of their masculinity? Why do incels refer to themselves as subhuman as well as others? And what is the social role that incels see themselves as taking on in our sort of society as well as on the forum? So I'll tell you very, very quickly about incels. So incel stands for involuntary celibate, and our specific focus is on manosphere incels. Now manosphere incels gather on this space on the internet, if you like, that is very anti-feminist rhetoric, right? So you might also think about men go their own way, or men's rights activists, pick-up artists, that kind of bunch. Your Andrew Tates and all of that stuff, right? What is distinctive of incels is that they adopt this black pill ideology. Now, the idea of pill comes from the Matrix. You take the blue pill, you stay in this illusion. You take the red pill, you see beyond the Matrix. The black pill is supposed to signal the more fatalistic or nihilistic version of the red pill, right? So the black pill tells you that, look, feminism has told us a lie, women are not oppressed. In fact, women are the oppressor. And feminism has given women too many rights, so they can get to be a little bit too picky. They no longer rely on men for economical benefits because they can go to work, own property and so on. So now they're being really picky in how they choose a partner in terms of their looks. And this is the idea of hypergamy. Women date up. So, I don't know, they have different ways of measuring attractiveness, but if I am of like a 6, I will never go for a 6, I'll go for an 8, 9, 10, and so on. Now, because incels see themselves to be at the bottom of the attractiveness hierarchy, and because they believe women would rather die alone than go out with someone who's like at the bottom of the attractiveness hierarchy, there's simply no women left for incels, right? That's the kind of thinking of the black pill. And where the black pill and the red pill really differ is this idea of fatalism. Like, there's nothing you can do as an individual to change your social position, right? Unless there's some grand systemic change, you may as well lay down and rot. The forum itself, I've got a little snippet there as well. The forum is very strict in who can join. You have to be a cis, straight man. It's marked with misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, racism, and so on. And what's quite unique, I think, in relation to other manosphere groups at least, is that there's a lot of self-loathing, and the self-loathing almost becomes like a status marker. The worse you have it, the more of an incel you are, the more genuine and true cell you are, right? Okay, so I'll quickly talk you through two of the kind of papers. So this one we've just submitted yesterday or the day before, which is very exciting, and it's about the self-referential use of the word subhuman. Why would anyone go around and talk, call themselves subhuman? Because it's not very nice. And this was led by our linguistics research assistant, Lily, who is in Aston. And essentially we created a subhuman corpus, so 330 posts of self-referential uses. So we subhuman, I am subhuman, they don't understand us subhumans, and so on. And she, along with Lee, they had the idea to apply move analysis to these posts. So this is the idea that a piece of text has a certain function, right? If I say, hello everyone, my name is Justina, the function, the move I'm making is introducing myself. If I say, hey, how are you? Tell me about your family, your kids, your blah, blah, blah. I'm building rapport or something like that, right? So we want to know, like, in those bits of discourse where they use the word self-referentially, the word subhuman, what are the moves that you make and what's the function of that? And this is very, brief findings, I suppose, but those are the 6 top moves. The only one I'll explain is the referencing Chad. A Chad in incel discourse is an alpha male, someone who is, has it all, I don't know, above 6 foot, has a jaw or something like that, right? So you think alpha males. And I guess not so surprisingly, we found that most of the subhuman moves, or most of the self-referential uses of subhuman involve moves referencing women. So it's Freud being female, humanoid, Freud's fault that I'm a subhuman, and so on, or Freud's have a way of getting us out of our subhumanity, that's a word, but they won't. So the very sort of key findings or key takeaway from this paper is that incels will use women as the key reason for them being subhuman, and that really helps to build that picture between being a victim and the oppressor. And that maybe could go a way of explaining why misogyny is so common and even justified, right? You symbolically fight against the oppressor, at least. The appearance genetics move reinforces this idea of biological determinism. Well, it's the way I look is the reason for my kind of low status in society, and it goes to reinforce the black pill idea that lookism is the key reason why incels, well, lookism and feminism, why incels kind of have a bad deal in life. And then very lastly, incels use subhuman to make moves that reinforce this us versus them divide, right? So obviously we've seen a little bit about Chad versus incels, but also majority of the society, sex havers versus incels, right? There's this very clear idea that they have nothing in common with the blue-pilled out there mainstream world, and that they're kind of, no one can understand them, which kind of creates a very difficult position because it's hard to get through to someone who really sees everyone else as having nothing in common with you. Okay, so this is the very, very quick snippet of the empirical work. Now I will talk about another paper that should be coming out very soon. I'm very excited about this. It's about how incels, and this is all theoretical, so at least I don't have to try and do the data stuff. How incels use the cell suffix, which is a very productive way of coming up with new words in the community, to essentially override the traditional role of a man into one that doesn't have any responsibility for kind of their own actions. So the cell suffix is often used combined with another word to signal the reason for being an incel. So for example, height cell is someone who attributes their inceldom to their height. Ugly cell is someone who attributes their inceldom to their physical appearances, typically their face. And then there's also a lot of words marked with kind of like almost slurry words, see, I never know whether to read that one out because it feels like a slur, so I won't. But you get these words that say, well, it's because I'm from this part of the world why I am an incel. And because these characteristics often point to some immutable characteristic of yourself, a feature of yourself, again going back to biological essentialism here, they seem to have this sort of almost status on the forum, right? The more of these you have, the more of these you collect, the more of a true, genuine incel you are. So I'll give you a very, very quick background on social roles if we have 5 minutes. Okay, so social roles are things in our social world that tell us immediately about what to expect from individual, what rights they have, what responsibilities they have, right? So my social role as a teacher will adorn me with certain norms, responsibilities, and so on. Marking, being wrestling, blah, blah, blah. My social role as a woman, as a long-term role, will also create certain expectations in our society, right? Not all of them are fair all the time, not all of them are nice, but they kind of just exist out there. And we have this difference between long-term and short-term social roles. Again, my social role as a woman is a long-term role, will probably last for the rest of my life. But I could also take on a short-term role, like a discourse role. Like this is a short-term role. Once I stop speaking, I will no longer be the speaker. Now, what's important that roles can change, and we can kind of, you know, undertake maybe some social movements to get those roles to change or something like that. And our discourse roles are normally can be, not always, but can be imported from our long-term roles. So here's a good example, and I'm about to say a slur, but I think that's okay, we're in a safe space. So for example, if someone called me a slut, that has effect because of my role as a woman. It says something like, oh, I'm not doing as I should be according to the traditional role of a woman. I don't know, being too promiscuous or something. So that's imported into the conversation, and the more that happens, the discourse roles will get exported back into the main kind of sphere to reinforce the idea that there's some kind of norms around being a woman, right? But we can also break them. So slut walks, for example, that happened in 2014, 2011, something, when women march through the streets holding placards saying, we're sluts and we're proud, or something like that, right? And that came from a police officer's comment saying if women didn't dress like sluts, they wouldn't get victimized, right? So it was a direct response to that. So that was an attempt to change, arguably, the long-term role through like shorter-term roles. So our argument with this paper is what incels do by using these cell terms is they take on this. They reject the kind of mainstream view of what a traditional man should be, right? So this is going a little bit to like hegemonic masculinity area stuff, but if you think about the practices a traditional man ought to undertake, they're kind of dominating, right? So first of all, heterosexuality and cisness seems to be part of it. They're dominant over women. They are kind of powerful, confident. There's a lot of stuff around like sexual prowess and heterosexual prowess. And he's expected or responsible to attain the female goods, which is nurturing, support, non-paid sex, and so on. So by highlighting this deterministic and fatalistic aspect, for example, if I keep calling myself a height cell, what I'm saying is like, we live in a society where I could never have undertaken this role, right? It is, it's nothing on me, it's the way the society is structured, so that seems to take away some responsibility and some stigma from the idea of being an incel. And this is why, arguably, the community creates such a safe space for them, because you're able to talk about your experiences of failures and so on without necessarily feeling like that's on you, and also you kind of find other people who share the same experiences. Okay, I'm going to ignore that. So I just wanted to highlight the different array of outputs because, like I said, we didn't just work on a single paper. So these are the various things that I covered. So the first one is the one on roles, and then number 4 is the one on the self-referential use of subhuman. But we've done a bunch of kind of stuff that related around incels rather than one particular thing around incels, which maybe if we get a big project on incels could come, you know, in use in really understanding how the community works. And we also have a bunch of stuff that is still in progress. The one that I wanted to highlight is number 2 that Mihaela and Thomas Chadwick are working on, and that's thinking of some kind of intervention, possible interventions, although that's still in a very, very drafty stage. And then we presented at some conferences and stuff to disseminate the information. I think in the future, here are some things that, I mean, for me would be cool to do, is to think, what would a successful intervention look like for someone in the forum? So not before people get to the forum, but actually for people who already exist in the space. And I don't have good answers for those. But if you have ideas, I'd love to hear them. Also, they do use the word subhuman to refer to other people as well. So is there any kind of difference in, well, there seems to be a difference, but like why use the same word for out-groups and in-groups? I find it interesting. And then we've only focused on incels, but it'd be interesting to see how they kind of fit within the larger manosphere, because I don't even think they're the worst lot, but I want to, would be nice to see the relationships between all of them. And that's it.
Great, thanks Justina. So any questions for Justina? Morocco?
Thanks a lot for your presentation. That is really fascinating. Do you know anything about the socioeconomic background of the incels? Anything about their educational background? I was wondering.
So it's very varied, actually. They're not like one united group in that sense. And also all we have to go off is the kind of data they give us. So they do like polls on their own sites. And actually, while there is a lot of people from like lower socioeconomical background, there's also a lot of people not from a lower socioeconomical background. They do call, they have one word called need cell, which is not in education, employment or training, which seems to be quite popular on the forum, which would indicate that a lot of people are not in education, employment or training, right? And they kind of see that as also contributing to their insult. But really, it's really like it's very varied. And I think if you think about, I don't know how much you know about like the famous incel killers, but Elliot Rodger, for example, he came from a very well-off family. You know, his dad was a film producer. He had great education and so on. So it's not always that like, you know, it's necessarily it's not the lower socioeconomic people that are drawn to this.
Can I just follow up on that question as well? So, can you say something about the geographical or cultural distribution of people who make up this community?
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that at the start of the presentation, I was thinking, well, this is a very North American phenomenon. In that, you know, the people, their language, the terminology used, Chad, for instance, it seemed very Americanized. But then you made reference to the South Asian community as well. So what does this community look like online?
So again, we only looked at one forum, which is the more extreme one, so I can only say about that. But there are specific forums in like this, a specific one in Russia, which obviously we don't have the skills to. But the one we looked at, I would say majority of them do come from America. However, maybe 25% make up the UK, and then it's sort of scattered. And also, you know, it's hard to say location-wise if you're from logging on from the UK, whether you know that's your kind of geographical background. But it is like the one we looked at is mainly kind of like American UK based, but they're sort of scattered everywhere.
Nadia?
Thank you indeed, that was a fascinating presentation. Can you tell us a bit more about the practicalities of conducting this kind of research? For example, how do you, it is an online community, but in order to collect data, as a researcher, do you become a member? Do you disclose the purpose of your study? Because I can only assume that if you say that the aim of my study is to study misogyny, for example, then people are not going to be very welcome. Do you engage in a kind of online ethnography kind of approach, and then are people aware that you're part of the community? Do you become a member? Do you get permission from someone to become members? How does this work?
So it's open to anyone to have a look at if you're bored. We didn't ask any permission to scrape the form from anyone. That was within our ethical remit. It was not within our ethical, so we couldn't become members. First of all, you'd have to lie and pretend you're an incel because there's no way you could join the community. And there are certain sub-forums that we can't, as like non-members, can't see. So it would be very interesting to see what goes on there. But these are all public-facing ones, so you can just scrape the data, and then I think the data that we scraped is like a 4-year period or something. But no, they're not. I mean, incels are very aware that they're being researched, and actually it's quite interesting. Sometimes they will post a whole academic paper and like take it apart. It's very like productive, and sometimes like make quite good points about like methodology or something. It's quite interesting to read. But they're kind of, and I know some people in this university, Alyssa from criminology, she's actually been kind of more involved in those communities. Or I know like Thomas from sociology, he interviewed people, some of them who identified as incels, but I think that's quite hard to do because of the fact that they don't want to be identified as incels, you know, they don't want to lose their anonymity. But yeah, no, we just scraped the forum and then cleaned it up, and the clever people did various things. But yeah, so we didn't ask for their permission.
Great. I think we've got time for one last question. Yeah.
Hey, I'm just wondering if you saw any nurturing within the community. So I'm wondering like what the payback is if you're in the communities. Obviously there's that lovely discharge of blaming other people for the inadequacies you perceive in your own life. And you talked about kind of status being given. I'm wondering where does that come from, and is there any examples of anyone taking care of anyone who's posting online? Did you see any nurturing or any sort of feedback, comforting loops that way?
Yeah, so we haven't looked, well, we had Tom starting to look at more like because there's a lot of talk about suicide on the forum, and there's a specific like tag you can give called suifuel if it's about suicide, and a lot of the time it's almost like encouragement, but it's also like understanding like, oh yeah, this is terrible, I have also experienced this, so it's like reflection that I'm seeing you back. In terms of the status, so the way it works, like the longer you spend on the forum and the more you post, the higher your status will be, and you can tell the status by the colour of the usernames. So you start off with grey, you call it the grey cell, and that's kind of like an insult almost. And you go all the way up to like Paragon or whatever. They've got all this. I mean, all of this language is very like almost like juvenile, right? Black pill, red pill, your grey cell, your da-da-da. And I think that probably speaks a lot to like when people come to this forum, they're probably quite young, and you know, you don't see that. I don't think, again, very difficult to tell from the data, but it's more like, you know, you're 18 to 25 that you're going to be posting the most. But you do see some nurturing, and you'll see, I was only recently reading about their views on the CEO killer person, very interesting, and they were kind of saying like, oh, I haven't seen this person post in a while, or they're okay. So you do get that sort, as you would from any community, I think, that sort of, yeah. Well, I don't know, checking up on you kind of vibe.
Great. Well, thank you, Justina. You better leave it there. So thank you again.
Thank you.